Proctor, and I'm excited and I'm just jubilant over here with our special guest today, none other than Seattle's finest, Carmen. Chief Carmen Best is with us on this evening. We want to welcome you to our candid COVID conversations, and we want to be hospitable to our guests. I want all of our members, attendees, and our newfound Cyber Pew members to know that we see your prayers. We're praying for you, praying with you. Continue to send your prayer requests via the email, the website. We're welcoming you on Facebook Live. We're also simulcasting on YouTube Live. So welcome. Send in any questions you have via the comments section. We have our crack staff is watching and tracking those, and we will follow up with those on today. I want to lay some groundwork, and we're going to pray. Matter of fact, we should pray first. Father, we thank you for this day. You made it. We'll rejoice and be glad in it. Lord, in these tumultuous times, we know that your presence is real and rich. We know that there's healing power, saving power, reconciling power in you, not only in the lofty realms of theology, but in the practical realm of our everyday life, one toward another. So heal, bless, and keep. And we ask these things in your name we pray. Amen. So we're going to lay the groundwork for our discussion. We're going to introduce Chief Best. I want to hear from her. Many of you may not know her. I want to hear her story, and we want to hear from her lens how things are going. But and then we'll have some questions that were sent in, and we'll take some questions. But what we're not going to do is disrespect the chief of police from my city that I grew up in. I'm so Seattle. I remember when the Sonics. Oh my goodness! Don't let me start. That's how Seattle I am. Yeah. What we will do is respect our chief, respect the office, and respect the church. We're going to raise pointed questions. Our topic, Chief Best, is moving from protest to progress. I want to be clear. That's not dismissing the discord that's now. I'd love to hear from your perspective and your office how you assess things are, and some tips and tools to help people move forward, work through, and build on some of the work that has been done. That's right. So we're not here to set you up with any gotcha questions, and we are practicing social distancing. Yeah. Amen. Just the production staff is here, and our setup is set so we can keep each other safe. So Chief Best, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. Give us a little insight on your background and what makes you tick, and we'll go from there.
That sounds good. I have my official bio, but I don't think anybody wants to hear that. I think they probably want to hear a little bit about me personally. So, I was born and raised in this area in Tacoma, and where my mom's family has been for now 5 generations of family. So this is home for me. My aunts and uncles, several of them went to Garfield. Many of them graduated from West.
Cut. As a Franklin Quaker, we're done here. I'm just teasing. Come on,
don't hate. Come
on. Don't get them started.
And colleges here and whatnot. So this is home for me. This is where I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. As you know, I'm currently a police chief. Honored to be here. But when I think about how I got here and why I'm here, I think of 4 real key areas. One is that, just being my parents were wonderful parents to me and my 2 brothers and 1 sister, and they really taught us the value of hard work, making sure that we always worked hard, always tried to achieve goals, set goals, and I've always done that both professionally and personally, and that hard work has come into play all the time. The other is making sure that we hold tight to our faith. We were in the Church of God in Christ, is where I was raised.
The grand old.
The grand old Church of God in Christ. Yeah, House of Prayer, Church of God in Christ. The grand old Church of God in Christ. But holding on to our faith, whatever that is, and making sure that we hold true to those principles about taking care of one another, about treating others with the golden rule, how we want to be treated, about having kindness and mercy in all of our interactions with others. And I was raised on those principles, and they have helped me both professionally and personally as I've come up through the ranks and through the years. And then and also just making sure that I connected with people, all sorts of people who often were just friends, sometimes mentors, sometimes sponsors, sometimes allies. They could come together when times get hard, and they will get hard at points for everybody, and how we can lean on one another to support one another and also to advance one another, and that's helped me. And then just having really good, strong family ties. My mom, like I said, was from here, born and raised here, 14 brothers and sisters. I got lots of aunts, uncles, cousins, and family right here. And we really try to make sure that we keep those family ties strong. So those things about me personally, I think it would have helped me to be able to feel really comfortable in my skin and who I am, so that when I'm in a position that just wearing this uniform is a whole nother ball game in a lot of ways. But, I'm really comfortable with me and who I am. And I think that's helped me over time to be able to lead and to be able to fight through some of these really challenging times like we're having right now.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
All of that. That's so awesome. So that takes me to two things, and we'll transition. I want to hear from you. And I had some other questions too that just came up because of what you said. Tell me, as citizens, there are outlets of information that are benefiting from giving us misinformation. We lead a multicultural church, age, race, gender, the whole 9 yards. And it's amazing how we can look at the same thing and see something totally different based on who's shaping the narrative. So in this current climate, the COVID and the social unrest, what would be some of the misinformation you'd like to clear up from your perspective?
Oh my goodness, where does the list begin? Let me just start by saying this. A lot of people take social media as news.
Yeah.
And social media is not news all the time. So you really have to, ferret out, other resources to verify and validate whatever you're reading, because some people can look at the same scenario. They'll get the beginning snippet, not the end snippet, not the beginning. So many other things can come into play. So, while it's opened up our ability to have a lot more information coming at us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you have to be really discerning about, where that information came from, what the beginning is.
Question
right?
the motive of who.
Yes, absolutely.
Consider the source.
Because that's the word I was looking for. Consider the source. Thank you, Pastor Proctor. You took it right out of my mouth. So those things are really important that we're doing that, so that we are not just getting in an echo chamber. And we hear that often, whether people are for good or for bad. The people get in that echo chamber and they're hearing the same things from like-minded people saying the same sort of stuff, and it sort of becomes their truth. And so we have to really be deliberate and intentional about listening and talking to others, and just making sure that we can validate and verify what we're seeing.
Awesome. So as you are leading Seattle's finest, what has been some of your challenge in leadership in this crisis?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, let me just start by saying this. Seattle Police Department was under a consent decree, have been for almost 10 years now.
Which means what?
Which means that the federal government and the Department of Justice set up a series of rules because there was an issue after an investigation, a pattern and practice of excessive force, and there was a really concern about bias-based policing. So through that whole process, and it took a bit of time, the Department of Justice, a federal judge, the city, and they ordered a federal monitor to review policies, procedures, practices, training, and all of the things that go into making the structural process of the police department. And we had guidelines and requirements that we were supposed to meet to ensure that we had a police department that was fair and ethical and just. Okay. And there was a whole lot of work over the last 10 years that went into that to make sure that we were meeting all the requirements of the Department of Justice, to make sure that the organization wasn't engaging in a pattern and practice of bias policing or excessive force. And we met all of the requirements therein. We felt like we've done all the things we were asked to do. There were still some concerns from the federal monitor, the federal judge, about some accountability things. But by and large, we did what we were asked to do. It's been about a decade. So we're feeling pretty good. We have great training. We have implicit bias training, 5 times more training than ever before. We have crisis intervention training. Everyone has to have crisis intervention training to deal with people who are in crisis, which means mental crisis, because a lot of our shootings were people who were in mental crisis. And so they wanted to roll that back. And then there was the de-escalation training became part of our use of force. So everybody had to have that. So there's a lot of things that we didn't have in place before that we put in place to have the appropriate metrics to make sure we were, operating in a way that was just and fair. All of those things that we've done, we have reports about disparity. We're looking at public-facing dashboards. If there's an officer-involved shooting, the video goes out, within 72 hours. All about transparency and accountability. And I felt like the Seattle Police Department has led the way. And even some of the issues that are coming up nationally about what they want police officers and police departments to do, Seattle's already done a lot of that stuff. And so we feel really good about that. And yet
there's still work.
Yeah, and yet, right? So I said, for me, the other day, I was at the Black Lives Matter march in Seattle. And I said it was kind of an epiphany moment because I was marching for quite some time. Then I stepped off and was watching the people go by, and I'm looking at all the signs of stop police brutality, defund the police department, no qualified immunity. And I'm talking about thousands of these signs. And I realized, although we've made a lot of advances, which we can feel a lot of pride in over the years about making sure that, the structural pieces were in alignment, we still had a lot of work to do. And I sum it up to say this. I think that one institution, whether it be the courts, who've had their own issues with oppression and race, trying to guide another institution who has a history of over 400 years of being used, to perpetuate, racist policies. That's not the answer to get to the hearts and minds and souls of the people we're supposed to be serving. And that was very evident to me the other day. So we really need to do something different. I honestly can say I absolutely feel proud of all the work that has been done to lead the way. Police agencies across the country come to us for advice on certain things, but we still have work to do. And that made it evidently, so self-evident to me. And so I'm looking at this as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. Every challenge is an opportunity. So let's reimagine, let's re-examine, let's reinvigorate ourselves to do better. And for me, that means making sure that we are working with the community directly in real time, because that consent decree is 10 years old, and it was, we're following all the guidelines and processes, but what it isn't is a real time connection to the community that we're serving. So as issues come up, we need to be right in there with the people who are most affected, talking about what do they want to see and how are we going to make it better for those folks. We need to have that real time dialogue. We also need to make sure that, in terms of the budget, where they're asking about money spent and they want to divest out of the police department and into other social services, well, why can't we do that to a certain degree? We should make sure that we all can recognize there's problems. I mean, especially in Seattle, we have a lot of homeless folks. We have a lot of people in crisis, a lot of addiction. So I would love to see people who are more aptly trained to deal with those folks. I mean, right now, I think a lot of police are dealing with failed and broken systems. So there's nobody else who's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So somehow now we're the first people who are responding to people who are in crisis. We're the first people who are responding to people who are addicted. We're the first people to responding to people who are homeless in the field. And so there should be some other mechanisms and ways to do that.
I'd say that's a bit much.
Yeah.
One job description.
Yeah. But as you know, those are things that we're responding to. So I think there's a place for, investing more. And it doesn't have to be investing more in those social services, and then bringing more people, into the tent, so to speak, so that we can really have real-time discussions about, we're thinking about changing this policy. What do you think? How would that work? Those type of innovative thoughts that really make people build trust, that we really lost, mostly because of the most recent demonstrations, and our reaction, our response at those demonstrations really caused a lot of trust to be lost. And I take that very personally. I know that we need to work on that and fix that. So we're going to do it.
Awesome. I want to go back. As you and I met first, you were interim.
Yes.
And how long have you been chief now?
Coming up on 2 years.
Okay. And you were interim for?
About 9 months.
Okay. So you shared some very powerful stuff that I kind of knew and you and I kind of touched on. But I just want to remind the folks in the audience, the timeline. These are processes of reform that have been being worked on for almost 10 years now.
Right, a decade.
You've been on here two years if you count the 0.9.
2.9. Yeah.
And the work has been going forward. And
yep.
and the, what did you call it? The consent decree came out of some concerns. I mean, so Seattle has been making progress. And it's interesting to note that some of what other cities are protesting to get, Seattle has already been working on in 10 years. Now, we still have a lot of work to do. And I have served on different committees over the years in that, I don't want to say shaping that, but in that dialogue, in that conversation with different agencies, groups, and ministries. I want to go back to, and then we'll move forward. I see they got questions as well. They have questions. In reshaping narrative, I want to clarify that just because folks are calling for next stage of police reform doesn't mean they're anti-police. Just because Black Lives Matter, that is not synonymous with anti-police.
I agree, it's not.
No, because when I call the police, I need them to show up.
Exactly.
And I need y'all to be ready and trained and ready to go.
That's right.
So I just want to clear the narrative because I've seen some things and people are.
You don't have to, it's not either or. You know, it was so funny. Is that I was talking about the murder of George Floyd at the hands of those officers in Minneapolis, and we were having these discussions. And I said, there isn't a person that I know of, you know, that didn't see that and think it was a murder and think it was terrible. And but for the fact that we were on duty, many of us would have been on the other side marching, you know, because it takes a grave indifference to human life to do something like that and not react on a human level. You know what I mean? Just on a human level. You know, those images are going to stay with all of us. That's which is sort of the impetus for this movement. As one minister said, not a moment, but a movement. But the movement because of it. So it doesn't mean that you don't care about Black lives if you're a police officer, or if you're Black Lives Matter and you don't want police service. But we do need to find some common ground to make sure we're going forward in the right way.
And that takes me to our first question. Some of these questions came in advance. We thank you. And we see your questions and we're logging your questions live. We're going to try to get through as many as we can. Some of them will overlap and we will kind of hybrid them like a Prius. So bear with us. Let's go to that. When we're talking about reform, what would the police department or the union view as reasonable reform? I know there's pushbacks in the argument, and maybe you can correct me on, maybe there's not. I know you and I were talking about the union's responsibility is usually wages, work conditions, and something else.
Benefits.
The pushback with reform, what would both sides on the bargaining table deem as reasonable that may take the consent decree to a next level of transparency and accountability?
Well, it's interesting because often people will ask about the resistance, as they deem the resistance of the union, but unions are here for just that. Wages, benefits, and working conditions. Okay. You know, and so as we have these contracts, the city, not me, but the city has contracts with the unions. It's like any other bargaining, right? They'll give something to get something. So we have to figure out how that's the structure. Now that may not be the best structure, and there may be people looking at how they might change that, but that is the structure as it exists. So, and there's always going to be about if we give something up, get something back, that kind of thing. And I think the judge, our federal judge, has said the one thing you can't bargain with is reforms. We're not going to pay for ethical, fair, equitable policing.
Yeah, that shouldn't cost me anything.
Yes, exactly. And there's that should just be a part of us moving forward and evolving. So there's that sort of give and push and pull. The union's like, well, we'll do it, but it's going to mean this. No, you're going to have to do it because it's ethical, fair, and just, right? And so the management part, the police chief and others, our job is to guide the directions, the policies, the procedures, the training of the police department. That's our job to do. So when people ask, well, what about this or what about that? I said, I run the department. The union handles wages, benefits, and working conditions. And those are all things that have to be negotiated by state law, by RCW 4156. That sort of is how that all is all deemed out. So I feel it's really important to make that distinction between the two.
I think civically, we need to be responsible with understanding that.
Right.
Case in point, I am not a politician. I'm a gospel preacher. So I'm going to give you that caveat so I can say this. Justice for one doesn't cost anybody anything. Justice for all. My justice doesn't take away from yours.
That's right.
Now, I want to take that and spring forward to this. So, as the head law enforcement officer for Seattle Police, then the actual protest should be toward legislator that shapes that, not you guys don't shape your own reform, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I think we should have a role in it. So,
okay.
So there's so many aspects of what people want to see reform.
Come on.
So this the consent decree covers some of the policy, structural stuff, policies, procedures, and things like that. If you're talking about reform in how we respond to, for example, an offense-involved shooting. There's rules. There's like I-940 that we have to respond a certain way. And
tell me more about that. I've done some homework, but I don't think they have.
That's legislated, right? So there's all we're beholden to a number of. I have city ordinances. I have federal. I have state legislated. All of those things we have to fall in line with to do the work. I-940 was an amazing grassroots campaign because people wanted more accountability in officer-involved shootings, particularly how they're investigated, who investigates them, the process for the families of in this case, in these cases, the decedent, how that's handled, and so all those reforms were initiated, by community, which actually is, I think, in some ways, really very, very good and very cool because they came forward and they say we want to see some changes, and they lobbied. They got everything on the ballot. It was voted on. The changes were in place. Now there is a carve out for the Seattle Police Department simply because we're under a consent decree, and the federal judge has made some rules about what we can and cannot do, and until we're out of that. So, but other than that, people have come together. For the most part, I think most police agencies and affinity groups and unions, it's the law. They got to go with it anyway, but they have embraced it and they're trying to figure out how to make it happen as written.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, I want to celebrate you and appreciate you being here with us. You didn't have to come. I appreciate, we respect you. We respect your office. We respect your time. And I don't want that to get lost in the sauce.
Thanks.
One of the questions came in for, all right. One of the questions came in, centered around the ratio of the majority of police officers are honorable men and women doing the best they can in a challenging spot.
Agree.
But how we handle, and I say we because we are the community, how we handle officers that break that trust.
Yep.
And good officers not checking rogue officers. You and I had some private talk about that
dynamic.
It's a unique dynamic. Case in point, I got a call from Minneapolis that was telling me that the cops in question, the officers in question that were alongside of George Floyd's murder were rookies, were first year. Right. And people were like, why didn't it stop? I know that neophytes don't have the leverage to necessarily do that. Right. So the question is, how do you all handle that dynamic?
Well, like I said, we've been working on these issues for a long
Yes, ma'am.
time,
This is not new.
Yeah. And so we just have it in policy. So, and somebody asked me, well, what would your officers do? I would expect that they would intervene. And that is in the policy. If you see something that is illegal, that violates policy, or there is a moral interpretitude, the expectation is that you will intervene. And so that's part of the policy as it's trained. And if you don't, that means you're violating, and that puts you, so to speak, on the grease too. So we just felt like we needed to affirmatively state that and train on it, so that the full expectation is that if you see something that's going on, that's a problem, that's wrong, that violates policy, and you don't act, you're in trouble too. And if your supervisor doesn't call it out when they see it, they're in trouble too. So that's an expectation built in from day one, because I think we can all agree in any profession, when you're the newbie, it's hard to, come up against somebody who's been there a long time, has a lot more experience, maybe they know better than you. And we recognize that. So we wanted to make sure that we told people, and that we tell them they're accountable for it, because, you're a lot better off reporting and letting us deal with it than you are to not do anything. We don't expect people to not react.
All right. I'm going to pause this and hear some live questions. I want the people to hear their voice, and I'll come back to some of these that were preempted. Some good stuff in here. Yes.
Chief Best, we're going to combine a couple of these. What it seems like we're hearing on our comments are, can you please tell us your journey and your work to change the systemic problem of racism in the department and in the community?
Okay, we want to hear some of the work you've done.
Yeah, well, I touched on a little bit of it, but some of the issues around, you have to change systems, right? And those mean that you have to change first your policies and your procedures, and then you have to train on them. And then the real big piece of that is you have to hold people accountable for their behaviors, and you have to monitor and evaluate and look at ways that we can determine what is happening in the field. One of the things I thought was one of the most interesting things that we came up with, because we have a couple of PhDs on our staff, is we did a disparity report, and we worked with our community police commission, and we got people from the community, and we took real life incidents and showed them video, and I wasn't there, to be fair, but they walked through each of those incidents with the community members to talk about, well, what happened here? What do we see that might be different? Why is there disparity? What would be some things we can learn from this? How we can respond better based on what you're seeing. And so we came up with some pretty interesting things, like people that said, well, for one, we think the descriptors are too vague. So they said, like, for example, if they said, a black female, 5'6", in a dark blue shirt and pants. So then the officers go and they find, somebody who looks like that, and they stop them. And they say, well, we want you to have more description than that, because there's too many.
That could be anybody.
Yeah, that's too, so you can say, well, they fit the description, but the description is so broad. Then that
could be problematic.
Yes. So we started thinking, okay, before we start approaching people, we need a little more definition to that. Or maybe we need to ask more questions. Well, I see somebody here. Did they have on black boots and a gold badge? Something like that. There's much more. So before we approach people, having more definitive descriptions was one of the things that came from the community, because we say it matches the description. Well, we think you should have more specificity within that description. Right.
Awesome. Thank you.
I didn't fully answer the question, probably. I just want, there's other things too. So making sure, making sure that we check on racial disparity, that we're actually evaluating, analyzing, and reporting out to the community what those disparities are. And there still are disparities. We acknowledge that. There's still, more people of color that are getting stopped. And so we wanted to see, well, why is that? And so those are the kinds of things that we're doing to root out some of the systems that allow for disparity to be in practice.
Thank you. Next question. Come on.
Thank you. What is the current status and structure of the SPD officer conduct review process?
Officer conduct review process. I'm not sure what you're referring to there, but I will tell you this. Every year we go through a full review of a whole lot of things. How many complaints? We run everybody's name to make sure there's no criminal activity from other jurisdictions or somewhere else we missed. Every year people have a performance assessment from their supervisor. So all of those things are in place to make sure that people are operating in a way that with the expectation of behavior that we want. And we also keep a wellness unit. We just started this, but a wellness unit to make sure that officers, we arm them every day, so to speak, with, a gun and what used to be pepper spray. I think the city council may have taken that from us. But we used to be a gun and pepper spray and other things out in the field. So we want to make sure that they're in a good place mentally, so that they're not reacting or overreacting to whatever circumstances that they're in. Yeah.
I was in a meeting with the head sheriff, and she said some interesting things that I said, I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Chief Best about this. And they were talking about some of the cognitive training things that they're looking at, even the apps in the phone and the cognitive stuff that affects the judgment, the biases, and et cetera, et cetera, and how to train officers to use the other part of the brain, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell me anything more about the cognitive retraining?
Yeah, well, I know that, I think you're talking about the former sheriff, Sue Rohr, who runs
she's retiring, or she has retired.
She's retired. She runs the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center, which trains all the new officers across the state.
Even yours or just county?
All of them.
Okay.
Yeah, from all agencies. So they do the baseline training, and then most agencies like ours do additional training that's specific to, your jurisdiction. But they do the baseline training. She's done a great job with, training the guardian mentality over the.
I had that on.
Yeah, over the warrior.
Tell us about that warrior guardian.
Yeah. So essentially, in a nutshell, it is making sure that you are a protector. That you're a protector of all the folks that you're coming into contact with. You're not there. Sometimes you do have to be a bit of a warrior depending on what's happening, but really your overarching function is as a protector of the community, a servant, and providing service. And so if you come to this profession with that approach, you're not there to beat everything down, to push everybody aside, to make a way, but you're there to protect people. Everybody. That includes sometimes the suspects too, right? Because sometimes they're in harm's way. They're going through some things. So she's really promoted that and really helped lay that great baseline and foundation for officers moving forward, so that we're approaching it from the right perspective.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me, and I wanted to hear more about the cognitive retraining and that warrior guardian dynamic in different forces, because I think I heard one of the leaders saying that one of the attractions to the police force is that warrior disposition. But she was, we can get you in trouble.
Right. So we've changed that. So it used to be, like recruiting videos, for example. They show people, boom, kicking in doors and rappelling out of helicopters and, all this stuff. And there is some of that goes on. Yes. But we really want, when we show our recruiting videos now, and a lot of agencies that follow suit, it's, officers engaged with community, playing basketball at the court, or, walking around the city, or doing things that are
hanging out by church by the side of the road.
That's right. Hanging out with Pastor Proctor.
Come on.
But those types of things, we wanted, and we really wanted to focus on bringing people in who want to be a part of the community and not apart from the community, and working together with people. So changing sort of even the recruiting in those aspects. We've done, I think, in Seattle, a pretty good job. We hired the top 5. We had a 40% minority hiring in the last few years, and about almost 20% women. So we really are being deliberate about bringing diversity into the organization. You need to see people who look like you when you're doing the work. Yeah.
All right. I have a challenging question here. It talks about, so training officers is not really the issues. The officers are actually well trained. The challenge is if these events were taking place in different communities, they would be handled, and we've seen them handled with different levels of dignity. So how does the department manage and reprimand or benchmark accountability when that is out of whack, when it's handled in a disrespectful, a disregard in the community?
You mean like if there's a complaint that comes in, or?
Because I'm reading the question, and it says the problem is we're not treated with the same dignity as certain communities. Therefore, absolute accountability, reprimands are needed, and benchmark punishments once an officer reached a certain amount of civilian violations.
Well, absolutely.
Come on.
Yeah, so we have to look at the pattern, practice, and history of what an officer has been doing, and we call that progressive discipline.
Progressive
So
discipline.
if someone, has a complaint of rudeness, and we verify. Everybody's wearing a body-worn camera, so it's like you can't see what's happening when they're working, and they they have a violation, which can happen. They might see a level of discipline. If that happens a second time, they might see the higher. Happens a third time, we might have to take them offline and start doing some additional work, or we may have to, this maybe isn't the career for them, so we have to have sort of a progressive, because everybody in any job can make a mistake. But a mistake is one thing, but intentional violations and repeated violations, that's different. And so it's really funny, because I don't know if it's a gender thing, but people always assume that I'm going to be lighter on discipline than other chiefs, but there's no way that's happening. I feel like it's really important to make sure that people receive an appropriate but fair level of discipline when it's consistent when it's needed and when it's required. And that includes, firing people too.
Awesome. So I want to follow up with that, but then I think I just lost my school of thought. That progressive discipline, here it is. So in bridging the gap between transparency and accountability, if progressive discipline is applied to an officer who's injured a community, how does that community know? Because I don't want to, you don't want to violate the privacy, but that trust is built when I know you took care of it for me.
Exactly. Well, there's a couple of things, because there's this process, and this is often, that people don't know. Like, we want to make sure that it doesn't look like there's that thin blue line, cops protecting cops and that kind of thing. It's always been a concern over the long history of policing. So we, in Seattle, we have 3 accountability partners. One is our Office of Police Accountability. They take any complaint, that's where you call. They're civilians, they're not attached to the police department, and they will do, there's some sworn that work in there, but it's under a civilian director, and they do the investigation, and they come up with the recommendations. They provide the recommendation to me, and I'll either agree or not agree. And that's for regular complaints. And then we have an Office of Inspector General, who looks at policies, procedures, training, data, trends in the police department. And she is a woman in there right now, is responsible for making sure that we are all in alignment with where we say we're going to be, and we're following the mission, and we're doing things fairly and equitably. And if a system, as was asked by somebody else, seems to be off or askew, they have a whole lot of evaluators. That's all they do. They're not cops. They evaluate systems and what's working and isn't. And then we have our Community Police Commission, which is a 15, or I think it's a 21-person commission now. Some are hired by the city council, some by the mayor, and others through OPA. And they come in and they determine, what issues are out there, things that they want to look at on behalf of the community. So I don't think there's any other police agency in the country that has 3 different levels of accountability. And the Office of Police Accountability, they publish everything. So if it's not sustained, you're not gonna know the officer and what happened. But if they say, yep, Carmen Best did it, we evaluated it, we investigated it, and they'll say, yep, she's guilty, so to speak, and it's sustained, and then this is the discipline that was meted out.
If I'm John Q. Citizen,
you can look it up.
And I made a complaint about, of course, not Carmen Best, Carmen Not So Best. And where do I go to see that?
Yeah, so they have a website. I don't have the name in front of me, but it's the Office of Police Accountability. Okay. It's in the city of Seattle. You can just type it in, Google it, it'll come up, and that's where complaints are filed, and that's where you can see
what actions were taken.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we have some more questions coming in live.
We do. Chief Best, can you let us know what the makeup of your command staff is? Is it diverse? Does it look like the Seattle community?
Yeah, as much as we can. I've been very deliberate about it. My command staff, when I came on, it was all mostly male, and everybody was a sworn officer. That's just the way it worked. You came up through the ranks, you get promoted, those are all the chiefs. And following in the, initially it was Chief Kathleen O'Toole brought civilians in to the command staff, which was like a shock. Even to me, it was like, well, it just was it hadn't been done before. But my command staff now is half male, half female, half women, half men. We have African American, we have Latino, we have Asian, we have lesbian, we have straight, we have, we try to have a diverse command staff that represents the community that we're serving to the degree that we can. There's 12 people, and all very capable. It wasn't like we just grabbed anybody. Capable, solid, good, hardworking people who really do think outside the box in terms of how we're going to move things forward. And with this latest movement that is just across the country and really across the world in many ways, we're looking at how we're going to reimagine what we're doing, and how are we going to re-envision policing in the future. And that may mean a whole wide breadth of things, but we really want to make sure that we're connected to people and to the people that we're serving. And everybody, to a fault in my command staff, was more than open to that. And even exploring options for maybe bringing another civilian on, a trusted community member that might be able to advise us and be a member of our staff.
A good one. Question. I think that's a great question. I think it's a very, very precise answer. I want to follow up with this. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what command staff is. Tell us what command staff is.
Well, command staff is a top tier leadership in the organization. So there's usually, and every department has its own sort of organizational chart. But for me, it's the police chief at top. And then my number two people on there one is a civilian. He's a chief operating officer in the number two position. Equally is a deputy chief, which is vacant right now, but that position. And then right under their assistant chiefs, and they handle each bureau: investigations, patrol operations, special operations, security, special events, and training and professional standards. So all those are underneath. But that's just the top tier of the organization.
Awesome. I wanted to bring clarity to that.
Yeah.
So I'm not assuming that everybody knows that. All right, wait, any more questions there?
We keep hearing the term defunding the police. What does that mean?
That's a great question.
I was wondering when that was.
Because there's a couple of different iterations of what that means. But essentially, I think in just a general sense, it means taking money out of money that was in the police department for other things, and using that and investing that money in social services and varying degrees of social services, depending on who you're talking to. And I just touched on that earlier. Right. But we definitely need it. I don't think it has to be and or. One or the other. I think that there is a place where we can help, move funds around and make sure that we're doing some of the work that police officers have taken on that, wasn't considered traditional policing, that could be funneled to other systems. There was in 18 months, we responded to 16,995 crisis calls. 16,995 calls where people were in mental crisis in the city. So in my view, that means that, it fell on the officers, and they all have been crisis intervention trained, and some of them have had advanced training. But wouldn't it be great maybe if maybe we should have a mental health provider or social worker responding to some of those calls? So there's ways that we can figure out, but we don't want to be the ones that dictate it. We want to work with the community to figure out what that is.
And I've heard in that context, that topic in different contexts. I've heard that.
Right.
And I was like, and I also, we're operating in a climate in our country where there's extremes, left and right. Want to defund the police, forget about it.
Yep.
That, to me, that sounds foolish. But I also heard that it was a response to, I heard some of my pastor colleagues from the Midwest, that the union in their city was so strong, the police union, that the idea of defunding the police was able to break They started over. Yes. They
literally started over.
Yeah.
I think that was in Minneapolis. Where that was done.
I wasn't sure.
But it's different people, different things, different people. But generally, that's what I'm hearing. There are some people who just want to abolish the police department altogether, and I'm not really an advocate of that, because I still think people need to respond to 911 calls for service. There's still, while there are many things that we need to work on and should be working on, but there are still people. If it's my daughter walking down the street and somebody assaults her or grabs her or does something, I want a police officer to respond. I want somebody to pick up 911. I want a cop to show up. But
not only that, I want your presence there so I can walk down the street.
Yep.
So I don't need you to come rescue my daughter. I need the streets to be straight, safe by presence.
Right.
And trained to intervene. So I thank you. I just wanted to bring clarity because the extremes, and then we end up judging topics, ideals, and people by the worst of the extremes. When in fact you said it when you first responded, that there's layers in how that looks depending on whom you're talking to.
Yep.
And so it can be redistributing resources.
Right. Or it could be starting over.
Or starting over because the system's so toxic.
Right. You know, there's 18,000 police agencies in this country.
Yeah.
So that means 18,000 sets of
independent.
That's right. Independent agencies in the country. So, you know, a lot of the major cities are very similar, but they're not exactly alike. So because of that, you know, the overarching messaging and the overarching policies and training, I think that's why the Congress is looking at establishing some rules, because everybody has their own rules, you know.
And then before I dismiss, because I did it, that's stupid. I dismissed it and I repent. Father, forgive me. Because sometimes we can jump to the conclusions without hearing it.
Right.
I also understand that some of it is rooted in the motive of, I'm paying you, and if I feel like you're abusing me, why would I keep cutting the check for that?
Yeah, there's that too.
That's some of the motive that I have to repent for. I didn't hear that. I didn't see that. So I'm trying to be a little wiser in my old age as my hair is falling out and what's left is gray. I'm trying to be a little sharper. All right. Sis Patty, you guys got some more questions for us? I have some here, but your mic's not on, Patty.
Can you hear?
Nope.
So when you were talking about funding, now I might be dating myself some. Let me check and see if the mic's on.
I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Now we can.
Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry. They were trying to tell me that it was on. Thank you so much. So when you were talking about funding, and I might be dating myself because I was born and raised here in Seattle. I live in Seattle. So when we're talking about our enforcement officers, I often wonder, with us having the funds that you all have in your service that you provide, will we ever come back to the place of having community officers in place that could respond to certain calls or community events that will not be so in a way where the community is not wanting you to show up, you know, as the presence of a police officer and being an enforcer versus being connected to the community?
Guardians versus warriors.
Yeah, well, that should be the overarching goal. You know, sometimes I'm trying to understand, like, you know, you want officers to engage in a non-law enforcement capacity, or
Right. So when they're coming, I'm sorry. People that you recognize, like the community, we used to know our police officers.
Mm-hmm.
We would know the police officers by whether or not they were community police officer versus being one that was an actual, you know, officer of enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like there's a disconnect because the communities really don't know the officers. Like my husband and I often have conversations about, you know, do these officers live in this area? Because we live in 98118. Mm-hmm. So it just appears like as if they have a disconnect. They're there for the work, but it just seems like there's a disconnection there.
I totally understand that. And that's one of the reasons that, a couple of things, because we've been going to so many calls for service, you know, I created a collaborative policing bureau. And the reason was so that we could have officers that attend events, work with kids, engage in programming, and do that kind of, so they get to know officers in a different way. But we had to carve it out. Some people say, well, all officers should be doing that. But the reality is, with 870,000 calls for service in the city, you're not going to get to do that. And that, I mean, they are going to be going from call to call, and they are going to be doing. So we needed to, figure out ways. I think every connection, every engagement is an opportunity. So we try to teach officers that you can have an outcome. You know, you can even arrest somebody and still not have them feel disrespected and demoralized and, less than, So we want to make sure we're training that. but they're not going to be going to the ballpark playing ball with the kids because they're handling calls for service. So that's why we created the Collaborative Policing Bureau, so that we had a contingent of officers that could respond, that could be out there engaging in programming, mentoring, working with the community, volunteering at parades and picnics and all of that. And then we also just recently brought on community service officers so that they can work all over the city. They're uniformed, not the exact uniform as I have on, but they wear a uniform. They get dispatched. They're considered system navigators. So if a person is homeless, or for example, when I was an officer, I remember going to a call where a guy hadn't committed a crime, but he needed some services and some additional help. Or elderly, you go to an elderly person's home for a reason, and maybe there's no real crime there, but you recognize that they need adult protective services, they need additional help. So now a community service officer can go do that. So as a police officer, I could say, Pastor Proctor needs additional services here. So can you come in as a community service officer and you do that outreach and you call the family and you do the extra work, and I can go handle the next call for service. So I totally agree with you. It's going to take a little while to turn that ship, but we are definitely working on just what you're talking about, because there is a disconnect and we have to acknowledge that. But how are we going to build it back up so you can build some trust? The officer in your area, you feel like there's a connection there.
I'm going to piggyback.
Thank you.
It hit me. I mean, I knew that, but like my AAU coach was Officer Jackson, rest in peace.
Mm-hmm. James Jackson?
Yeah,
love that guy.
He was my AAU coach and a deacon at our church. I'm a date Patty and her peers. Officer Parnell was our Fronts Terrence baseball coach back in the day, rest in peace.
Right.
Yeah. And you know what? That hits different because he was back then. Your coach was like the pastor too. So we'd love to see some more of that. Questions? Come on.
So we have one question from a viewer of Facebook. During the hiring process, is there any database in place to identify whether an officer has been fired from another police locality within due to misconduct?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. So we always check all the employment records and history and all of that. But if there is a state, not for specific to Seattle, but there's a state database. So if you get fired for an agency, your certification gets pulled. There's a database for that. So you have.
But it's not national, it's state?
It's a state. It's not national.
So if I was in Minneapolis, got fired, moved out here.
Yeah, and then you come out here and we would, there's a background check. Okay. So we call family members. Sometimes we even fly out to the state to check things out. So somebody's going to say, well, typically they work for the police department or they did this or that beforehand. So we do check.
But there's not a national register.
But there's not to my knowledge, not a national register for that information. Although that has been suggested so that you can figure out when cops, a lot of times they don't get fired. The issue is because you'll know that.
Get reassigned.
Yeah, they quit, they decide, or they apply to another agency, like they get in trouble and then they
get out before it goes bad.
And that's where we need to really do some digging to make sure that we're getting the right people.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Come on.
Okay, I think this might be our last one. We're in our last 2 minutes here.
I know the people in charge. We can go if we need to.
What's going to happen to the East Precinct with everything happening in the Chaz?
That is a very good question. And I wish I had a definitive answer for you. I've made it very clear to everybody. I believe the officers should be back in the precinct. I know that there are a lot of competing interests for the building, but it just makes sense to me that the building was set up for officers to respond from. There's a lot of things that go into that. Most of the officers were body-worn cameras. All the systems have been set up so they can do the downloads and the uploads. The parking is there and all the maintenance stuff that we need for our equipment. So the officers should be operating from that building. It just makes a lot more sense to do it that way. And it's fiduciarily responsible because the city, the taxpayers are paying for that building. And not to mention,
where are they operating from?
Right now, they're operating in other precincts, and their response times have more than tripled to calls within the entire East Precinct. I want to be clear because people took that out of context. So it's not just the response times to that little area. Within the entire precinct, response times are tripled for the Priority 1, which are important calls for service. So just from a practical sense and a responsibility sense, I think the officers should be back in the precinct responding from the precinct. And not to mention, I've heard from other community members that Sam Smith, who was the first African-American city council person, fought really hard to make sure that there was a precinct where police could respond and give equal and fair service to everybody, including the Central District, which probably isn't as diverse now as it was then, but it still served a real important purpose. And that's part of his legacy. And a lot of folks feel really strongly about that they fought really hard to get that precinct there for a reason. And it's part of the legacy of the building and the facility. So personally, I think the officers should be responding from that precinct. I feel like it's an equitable service if they're responding from elsewhere. So all the people in that area aren't getting the same level of service as everyone else in the city because it's taking us longer because we're not in the general vicinity.
Thank you. Is that it? All right. We're coming to the end of our time. There's so much more we could have gotten to. I want to thank you for I've talked to your admin. Your schedule is busy, and you spent some time to hang out with us. To all our guests, our members, our attendees, our new cyber fellowship, we want you to be informed, to protect yourself, and we're praying for you and your family. Another shout out to Chief Best. It's Seattle's finest of Seattle's finest.
Great.
And thank you for sharing with us. Make sure you can go to, what was it, Seattle? What did you say? The
Office of Police Accountability.
Office of Police Accountability. If you had those issues and you want to know what Seattle's SPD has done in those areas, please do that. And thank you again. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I pray that you and your team are safe, and may God continue to bless you and your family.
Thank you so
for hanging
much.
out with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any announcements? I should have them on my little board here. All right. Our announcements are, I don't have them. I'm going to use yours. All right. Next week, our candid COVID conversations with Dr. Kim Lampson. Love under lockdown. Couples pushed together and kept apart by COVID-19. That'll be June 24th, next Wednesday, 6:30, right here. So I know that's been a strain on many marriages. As pastor, we get those calls. Sunday services are live streamed via Facebook and YouTube, 10:30 a.m. I know our state, I guess, our county is on, 1.5. As such, our fellowship is a little too large to serve at 1.5. So we're still live streaming. And when we get the green light, we're going to be rocking and rolling. So we're praying for you, and worship with us and join us. Sunday's Bible study on the book of Philippians with Dr. Aaron Winter, 6:30 p.m. You can go to the church website and it'll click you right live on the YouTube page. And you can still be faithful in your giving via the Cash App CBSR2, or our website, and by mail, P.O. Box 68545, Tukwila 98168. For more information and announcements, go to the website, www.cbsr.org. If I didn't miss anything, I think that's it. If I did, go to the website. You can get it. Send in your prayer requests. We're praying for them via email, via voicemail, or right there on the website. We're praying with you. We're praying for you. God bless you, church by the side of the road. Family of believers, drawing others to Christ, to his word, through his word and our example. God bless you. Let's pray. Father God, in the name of Jesus, we bow, knowing and trusting that you do all things well. Bless our city, bless our county, bless our law enforcement officers, Lord God. Bless our civic leaders. You said in your word, pray for those who have rule over you, Lord. Bless these men and women who are serving and putting themselves in harm's way. But Lord, bless their families. Send them home safe. Bless the communities they serve. Grant us a portion of wisdom and grace sufficient to intercede in very critical crisis moments. But Lord, without you, we're nothing. But in you, all things are possible. And we thank you. We thank you and we praise you. This is our prayer. Together we say amen. Go in peace, go in grace. God bless you. Thank you.